From the Digital Media Center, on the campus of Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon. This is Ramping Up Your English, an educational program for intermediate level English language learners. Here's your host for Ramping Up Your English, John Letts.
Welcome to Ramping Up Your English. This is episode 103 in our Native American unit on Native Americans. We've seen the effect of Spaniards and Portuguese on the Native Americans, but the Spaniards and Portuguese were not the only ones interested in America. Today's video is about the actions of the French in Nouvelle, France. The St. Lawrence Iroquois may well have heard the approach of the French ships before seeing them. The fog often obscured the far northeast coast. Once the ships were sighted, Chief Donnacona would have been informed. Like any good leader, he would have to consider the risks this unprecedented presence entailed to his people. Unlike the unfortunate people of the South, St. Lawrence Iroquois had had no experience with Europeans. Would encounters with the French be any different from the encounters others had had with the Spanish and the Portuguese explorers? The year was 1534. King Francis I of France had received a report from Florentine navigator Giovanni de Verrazzano with much interest. Verrazzano had explored the east coast of North America well north of the Spanish presence 9 years earlier, and had suggested French colonization could bring riches into the French treasury. King Francis sent Jacques Cartier to learn more, and tasked Cartier with finding the fabled Northwest Passage, a water route through North America to Asia. Votre vin blanc, que le marin boit en passant. It was Cartier's ships that cautiously sailed westward, past the land of the Micmac, to the territory of the St. Lawrence Iroquois. While Basque and Breton fishermen had worked the coast for the rich veins of cod, Europeans had never sailed this far into the St. Lawrence River. The St. Lawrence Iroquois were curious, but cautious. They gave the strangers a friendly welcome. At the Gaspé Peninsula, the French explorers planted a cross and claimed the land for King Francis I of France. Chief Donnacona was not oblivious to the meaning of planting that cross, nor were the St. Lawrence Iroquois that were with him when they made this first contact. Their initial welcome was quickly morphing into agitation and hostility. Here's where Cartier responded differently than European invaders to the south. Cartier invited Donnacona and some of his family to dine with him aboard his ship. Perhaps it was curiosity that got the best of Donnacona. He accepted the invitation and found himself in unfamiliar surroundings. This may be the first conquest of French cuisine in the New World. A feast was laid out for Donnacona and his tribal brothers, but the most convincing factor was likely to be the wine that was served. Donnacona was likely shocked when Cartier suggested the chief's own children sail with him to France to learn the language and see the home of these sailors. Whatever reluctance he expressed, Donnacona ultimately agreed, trusting Cartier's promise to bring his 2 sons back when he returned in a year. There's no record of what the chief and his family felt as Cartier's ship sailed away with Donnacona's children. The business of survival continued. The St. Lawrence Iroquois lived in a land rich in resources, but those resources had to be gathered before the bitter winter cold set in. The St. Lawrence Iroquois were not even part of the Iroquois League, those 5 tribes who formed a confederacy after generations of fighting each other. There were other Iroquoian-speaking people living further upriver, the farming and trading people we call the Huron. There was a long history of conflict between the Huron and other Iroquoian-speaking people, although a great amount of trade occurred. The St. Lawrence Iroquois were surrounded by other groups who had different ways of life and different languages. The widest spread were the Algonquian-speaking people, who lived throughout Northeast America and the Great Lakes region. A year passed before the St. Louis Iroquois saw the ships of Jacques Cartier. True to his promise, Donnacona's 2 sons were returned, healthy and bursting with stories about living in France. Not only had they learned enough French to interpret for their people, they had enjoyed their time in Cartier's country. Cartier's return, and more importantly the return of the 2 boys, was celebrated with a feast. Thus Cartier's second visit got off to a smooth start. He visited Donnacona's home village and felt safe enough to leave his ships there, continuing upriver in smaller craft. The hospitality of the St. Lawrence Iroquois was of great benefit to the Frenchmen, but Cartier was not impressed by the village of the chief. He continued upstream to the village of Hochelaga, where over 1,000 villagers came out to welcome him. They had heard about the French making contact with their neighbors downriver and were eager to meet these strangers. Cartier attempted to go further upstream, but they were blocked by rapids. Despite their great welcome feast at Hochelaga, the villagers saw Cartier leave them after only 2 days, floating back downstream to the village of Stadacona. That's where Donnacona learned that the 110 Frenchmen planned to spend the winter there. A freeze-up left Cartier no choice. Winter along the St. Lawrence River was brutal. It was the killing time. The St. Lawrence Iroquois had long since learned to survive in the extreme cold, but 50 of Donnacona's people died, while the Frenchmen started dying of scurvy. One of Donnacana's sons, Domagaya, taught Cartier to make tea from the bark of a tree to combat the illness. Thus 85 of the 110 men slowly recovered. The winter was past telling stories, and Donnacona told Cartier about a land up country that was rich in gold and rubies. Cartier now had visions of riches for himself and the King of France. In May, he kidnapped Chief Donnacona and some of his family and sailed east, returning to France in July. He wanted the king to hear about the land of riches from the Indian leader himself. King Francis was occupied by conflict with King Carlos of Spain. He saw neither Cartier nor the Indians he kidnapped until a year had passed. The king made no commitment to fund another voyage to America. Years went by. Cartier resorted to pillaging foreign ships for treasure. His neglected kidnap victims got ill and died. In 1541, the St. Lawrence Iroquois saw Cartier return, this time without their beloved leader. They were told that Donnacona had died in France, but that the others chose not to return, which was a lie. Cartier had 5 ships this time, but much of the crew was made up of convicts. Cartier left much of his crew to prepare for winter while he led a small party to find the riches in the upper country. He found very bad weather instead and returned to brave another winter. In his absence, some of the criminals had abused members of the village. Consequently, the St. Lawrence Iroquois no longer came to trade food for European items. No longer considering the French to be their friends, Some attacked Frenchmen as they prepared for winter, sending the survivors running to their newly built fort, where they stayed in misery during an especially harsh winter. By spring, Cartier forgot about traveling to the upper country. He loaded his ships with glittering metal and crystalline gemstones and headed back to France with a worthless cargo of fool's gold and quartz. Cartier would never again sail to the St. Lawrence River. He had found a friendly reception and did some trading with the St. Lawrence Iroquois, but his kidnapping of their leader and abuse by convict crew members soured that relationship. The French would not return until over 60 years later. Everything about the Wendat people spoke of balance. Living with the flora and fauna of the Great Lakes region, the animals with which they shared this rich country came to sacrifice themselves for food, clothing, and tools. It was the role of the Wendat to honor and respect them, else they stopped coming. The Wendat homeland was centered in the backwater of Lake Huron, the part we call Georgian Bay. The bay was rich with wildlife: waterfowl, crustaceans, mink, beaver, and countless fish species. Rice was there to harvest in the wetlands. The surrounding marsh and woodlands produced an abundance of food sources, including white-tailed deer, moose, rabbits, and squirrels. Prey species were there, respected as teachers, like the wolf, bear, and coyote, sometimes providing layers of clothing to keep the Wendat warm during the bitter cold winters. The Wendat spoke a language in the same family as the Iroquois, and they practiced many of the same customs. Like their hostile neighbors to the south, the Wendat constructed large, extended family longhouses in a matrilineal society. These structures provided shelter for dozens of people, providing shelter during the winter months. Those winter months could be brutally cold in the entire Great Lakes region. The Wendat were all about balance in another way. They were the traders, the conduits for goods moving from the St. Lawrence Valley and the maritime areas to the Inuit people of the north. Dried grain from agricultural tribes were in high demand from those who lived in short growing seasons further north. They in turn traded the best quality animal furs. Even people further west traded goods through the Wendat. Being the middlemen of the extensive trade network provided a good life for the Wendat. This wealth was largely a result of their location, but such a trade network was not controlled by accident, and there were people who looked with resentment and envy on this control. The Iroquois Federation longed for the favorable position enjoyed by the Wendat. Once the five nations stopped fighting each other and formed the Iroquois League, they exerted more pressure on their neighbors. Both groups maintained able warriors. Wendat warriors knew very well that if they were taken prisoner in battle, their lot was to be tortured and killed, for they had the same practice. Violence broke out this way from time to time, but the balance of power was maintained. With traders visiting the surrounding tribes, and with the gathering on the coast for hunting seals, the Wendat would have heard about the visits by French navigators. The experience with Jacques Cartier by the St. Lawrence Iroquois 60 years earlier would have piqued the interest of the Wendat leadership. During their travels, some may have even seen the abandoned forts at Charlesbourg Royal. Imagine the excitement when Samuel de Champlain arrived in his towering ship. Much had changed since the days of Cartier's journey. The St. Lawrence Iroquois no longer existed as a separate tribe. European diseases had decimated the population, and many of their villages were now abandoned. Champlain had established Port Royal among the Micmac people, but he soon made friendly contact with the Wendat and other communities living in the St. Lawrence Valley. Responding to their pleas for help against the Iroquois League, Champlain entered Iroquois territory with a few French soldiers and over 50 Indians. The party moved in an area we now call Lake Champlain in Upper New York in 1609. When 250 Iroquois warriors confronted the French patrol, Champlain did something that proved his loyalty to the Wendat and made enemies of the Iroquois for the rest of the century. He raised his arquebus and shot 2 Iroquois chiefs, killing both with one shot. This was a new experience for the Iroquois. They broke off the attack and retreated. The Wendat were impressed by Champlain's loyalty, but also by the power of his weapon. In a later skirmish in 1610 with the Mohawks, Champlain was wounded with arrows. The Wendat carried him back to their village and nursed him back to health through the long winter. That battle ended Mohawk aggression for 20 years. The Wendat treated Champlain as a member of their tribe. Champlain established the New France town of Quebec in 1608. He let the Wendats know that he would trade French goods for beaver pelts there. In Europe, there was great demand for pelts of beaver because they were ideal for making felt hats, and it seems everyone had to have one. The Wendats collected beaver furs from the people to the north and west, some of them Algonquian-speaking people who had traded through the Wendat for generations. The Wendats would paddle their canoes piled with beaver pelts to Quebec to trade. The French traders always wanted more, so the Wendat spread the word to the people of the upper country, asking for more beaver pelts. Possessing European goods, metal tools, colorful beads from Italy, cooking pots, and other objects of wonder, became the ultimate status symbol among the Wendat and Native Americans with which they traded. Beavers seemed to be in infinite supply. The Wendat, who came to be called the Huron by French traders, were very happy with this arrangement. Samuel de Champlain secured the route along the Ottawa River and made contact with tribes neighboring the Huron. They sent young men to live among these newly contacted people, cementing friendly relations, learning their culture, and developing language interpreters. These Frenchmen often married native women. The progeny of these marriages became known as the Métis, the mixed ones. The Métis became the backbone of the fur trade. Independent traders known as courriers de bois, runners of the woods, competed against the corporate French monopoly. English colonies to the south joined the trade, and the competition was on. Allied now with the English, the Iroquois sought to replace the Huron as the middlemen of the fur trade. Since time immemorial, beavers have been a major shaper of the North American landscape. They built dams to create new wetlands, supporting a habitat where multiple species of animals and plants can thrive. That impounded water allowed beavers to build lodges where they were safe from predators and bitter cold weather. Their fur allowed them to swim in ice-cold water. It was a thick undercoat topped by longer strands. Beaver pelts had long been used by the Wendat and their neighbors for warmth. Now the French traded for them, and the demand was ever growing. Samuel Champlain greatly expanded and changed the trade in beaver pelts. The competition and endless demand for beaver fur threw the ecosystem and the First Nations societies out of balance throughout the region. Men of the tribes now spent virtually all their time seeking beavers to trap. The critical activities of securing food were replaced by trapping and trading beaver. While the Wendat continued trading, their position brought them in conflict with the Mohawk and other Iroquois tribes. They were able to secure firearms from the French, but they also traded for alcohol, which destroyed their society from within. The Wendat also struggled to get their furs to the French, as Iroquois aggression blocked the easier trade routes. Then, for 3 years, Quebec was occupied by the English. All this conflict is often called the Beaver Wars, and they had a devastating impact on the Wendat. Casualties were high in this war, leading to mourning wars by the Iroquois. They constantly raided neighboring communities to replace members lost to battles and European diseases. Some captives were tortured and killed, but others were offered membership in the tribe. The Wendat were almost eliminated by the Iroquois when the Five Nations attacked the Wendat capital of Windake, killing hundreds and taking thousands of prisoners. The French eventually made a peace treaty with the Iroquois, but damage to the friendly Wendat was already done. The French traders became more directly involved in the fur trade to the north and the west, forming friendly relations with the Ojibwa and other Great Lakes tribes. Those who remained of the Wendat barely held on and were no longer major players in the fur trade. Many of their villages were abandoned. Survivors moved west and then south and joined other tribes. Some of the reconstituted tribes in the west became the Wyandot, moving to northern Ohio and southern Michigan. The town of Wyandot, near Detroit, bears the name Wyandot. For the Wendat and other Native American tribes, Samuel de Champlain had established a great bond between First Nations and New France. Champlain also set the pattern of accepting tribal culture with respect and approaching them with friendship. Champlain was genuinely interested in the cultures of these native people. He saw them as equal partners and treated them with respect. As the reach of New France expanded, this approach was continued even beyond the life of Champlain. Sons of French settlers continued to live among the Native American communities to learn the language and culture. These boys received deep culture in the groups in which they lived, and many refused to go back into French society, finding life with the Indians more to their liking. Like the young men Champlain sent to live in Native American communities, Jesuit fathers approached Native Americans with a great deal of respect and tolerance. From the Native American perspective, these men were puzzling. Their lifelong abstinence was especially perplexing. They were also suspicious when diseases killed their people, but not the missionaries. Jesuit missionaries made their share of mistakes, but they learned from them and found commonality between Christianity and native religions. This helped build trust between the French and their Native American partners in trade. The Jesuits were instrumental in expanding the area of French influence. Jesuits were successful in establishing missions, where the work of converting Native Americans to Christianity took place among willing converts. Father Marquette was active in establishing missions in the areas of French expansion. He established those at Sault Ste. Marie and St. Ignace. Missions were added at Detroit and all along the Mississippi River. Algonquian-speaking people were widespread in North America. Father Marquette learned the language, geographical knowledge, and customs. These were indispensable when Marquette teamed up with Louis Joliet to explore the Mississippi River. They contacted settlements all along the river, always approaching with a peace pipe. That custom and the similarity of language made the explorers welcome in many communities along the river.
Lorsque, par un décret des puissances suprêmes, le poète apparaît en ce monde ennuyé, sa mère, épouvantée et pleine de blasphèmes, crispe ses poings vers Dieu.
They traveled as far south as the Arkansas River, then returned north to avoid any dangerous contact with Spaniards. Father Marquette gained much knowledge in this journey, as well as a wider expansion of trade and French allies. Thus, more and more Native Americans met French explorers, and the area of New France expanded. It would soon expand again. The exploration of the Mississippi River by Marquette and Joliet was followed later by Robert La Salle, who followed the great river to the Gulf of Mexico, greatly expanding French claims. La Salle's voyage also opened up areas of the east of the Mississippi River to French activity. For many Native American groups, learning French became the way to get access to European goods. French expansion extended westward as well when Pierre Radisson reached the western tip of Lake Superior. This brought the Ojibwa into the French sphere of influence. The Ojibwa, also called the Chippewa, were a powerful force in this area. Their influence went far beyond their own homeland. Looking at the North American continent, New France sprawled across the Mississippi Basin, matched by areas west controlled by Spanish occupation and a small area of English colonists at the east section. This great French influence was earned by relatively good treatment and respect of Native Americans. But the diseases and wars that came with these Europeans resulted in great tragedies. Those who survived found themselves increasingly dependent on their French friends for their very survival. You're watching Ramping Up Your English. This is all for episode 103. See you next time on Ramping Up Your English. I'm John Letts.
You've been watching Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate level English language learners. Learn more. Visit our website at letscreate.org. You can also watch or download today's program at archive.org/details/roadtv. Join us next time on RBTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English.